Good morning, church. Boy, my dad really helped me out. Thank you. This, if you were with us last week, kind of fell over on us, and it's up higher. This is great. Saved my back a little bit. It's great to be here this morning. Church Online, welcome. You're a part of our family. We love you guys so much. Well, this week is week 4 of our series of What Would Jesus Undo? And I just got to say, we have been so blessed through this series. The Lord has really revealed a lot to us over these last several weeks here as He continues to do a work in us as the church. If you're new with us over the last 4 weeks, we've been looking to the words of Jesus to find out what are some of the things that Jesus warned us about, or maybe some of the things that grieve the heart of our God. What would Jesus undo in our lives today? Week 1, looking back, we talked about having a lukewarm faith. Jesus would undo spiritual indifference. Week 2 was a powerful week. We talked about undoing hollow worship. Last week we looked in the mirror and we exposed the mask and we saw that Jesus hated hypocrisy. He couldn't stand it. And this week Jesus will undo spiritual pride in us. This week Jesus will undo spiritual pride when we find our value and our meaning in ourselves and in what we accomplish and how we compare ourselves to others rather than finding it where we're supposed to, and that is in Christ Jesus. Amen. When I started seminary, I had to learn to write these things called essays. And some of them were really, really long. Who here has written an essay before? Quite a few of you. The kids, I like that too. They're no fun, right? No. Well, I didn't write a lot of papers in high school, which really means I didn't write any papers in high school. So I had no idea what I was doing. But I like to write. I wrote a whole bunch of love letters from the age of, 3rd grade to like 6th grade. I wrote a lot of love letters to the girls. So how hard could it be, right? I got this. And so I get this assignment, my first real big paper. And so I go to the library, I look up all these top theologians and Bible scholars. And I read all these great published journals. And I picked out some powerful scriptures that really went together. I really poured my heart out into this paper. I worked so hard on this thing. It took me about a week to write, but I finished it and actually, it came out pretty good. When I read it to myself, I was like, wow, this kid's pretty smart after all. So about 2 days before the paper was due, I'm going through these instructions on what to do and how to submit it in. It was all done online. And it said before turning in your work, as part of the editing process, is to be sure that somebody else, someone that you trust, someone that would be honest with you, will proofread it, will read your paper, and will give you some honest feedback on what they think. And I'm like, that sounds like a great idea. So when Katie gets home, I said, babe, would you read my paper and give me an honest opinion of it? She said, sure. And so she grabs one of those red Sharpies. She sits down at the dinner table and she starts to go through it. Well, about an hour later or so, I'm pacing around, walking in and out. You done yet? No, just go away. I'll let you know when I'm done. 45 minutes, an hour later, she says, babe, I'm all done with your paper. And I hate to say this, but your paper's kind of all over the place. I'm not really sure you're getting the main point across in a couple spots. She hands me this paper, and it looked like the red Sharpie had exploded on the entire 15 pages of it. She had all these question marks everywhere and lines going through entire paragraphs, my main thoughts, and there are all these little notes saying, what does this even mean? And this needs to be cleaned up. And cleaned up, I mean, what was she, my editor? I mean, honestly, what I was expecting was someone like, babes, this is awesome. This is like the best thing I have ever written. Well, that I had ever written. So I sat down and I've got this paper and I'm looking at all this hard work that she had marked all up. And so I'm trying to sort of rewrite the areas. And at some point, I just got frustrated, right? I just got frustrated. I just felt like she wasn't getting my suddenly newfound college intellect. Honestly, this is what I began to think. It's laughable now to retell the story now, but in the moment, I wasn't joking. So the next day, Katie comes home from work. She asked me, how's the paper coming, hon? How's it coming? And I said, babe, honestly, I really appreciate you looking through it and reading it. I appreciate all your help and everything, but I'm pretty sure that the professor is going to get what I'm talking about here. Talk about digging a hole, right? So I ignored her input. I made a couple of small changes, and I emailed it off to my professor. A few days went by, and our grades were posted. My first big paper, and I made a D. It was actually a D minus. And it wasn't even so much the grade as it was the note the professor had written. And he wrote, Nick, this is not, and he underlined, not acceptable work. I strongly suggest that you review the course outline, follow the instructions, focus on your main thesis, and I'm going to allow you to rewrite this paper and to turn it in. So you know what I had to do. Later that day, when I thought the timing was right, slid up next to my wife, and I was like, babes. So I got that paper back, and well, it didn't go so good. I got a D minus. So I'm going to need to rewrite it, and I was just wondering if, you'd be willing to help me again with this, and just kind of show me, just let me know how, maybe, you were right, I was wrong, I'm sorry. And Katie, of course, full of mercy and grace and forgiveness, leaned a little and she said, I'm sorry, babes, I couldn't hear you. Can you speak up a little bit louder? We've all been there, right? At some point, I was wrong, you were right. Help me out on this one, that pride comes before the fall. Pride comes before the fall. Today we're talking about how Jesus would undo spiritual pride that's in so many of our lives. And to do that, we're going to once again look to the words of Jesus as he tells us this very powerful story in Luke chapter 18. But I want to give you all a heads up before I do. And someone told me this years ago, really stuck with me, and he said, one of the most loving things that you can do with another person is you can look them in the eye and you can tell them the truth. Right? And so today, what God's Word's going to do, it's going to look us in the eye, and it's going to tell us the truth today. So if you got a seatbelt in your pew, you might want to just buckle that thing up today. So Luke chapter 18, beginning in verse 9, Jesus is going to tell us this parable. It's a story about these two guys, who go to the same place for the same purpose. Two guys, one a Pharisee, yay, a good guy, and another a tax collector, boo, a bad guy. And we'll go into that a little bit. But the two men go to the temple, the visible presence of God, in order to pray to God. And Jesus is going to tell what they pray for. And then he says one of them will leave right before God, and the other one doesn't. But it's not going to be who we think. Let's unpack this, beginning in verse 9. This is what the Bible says. It says, and he being Jesus, told this parable to not everybody, to some people. Who did he tell it to? Some people who trusted in themselves. In other words, the kind of people who put their hope in themselves. They put their faith in themselves. Why? Because it says they viewed themselves as righteous. I do the right things. I'm right before God. And because they viewed themselves as righteous, they viewed others with contempt. Because your relationship with God can't be separated from your relationship with others. You know, the vertical always impacts the horizontal. The vertical always impacts the horizontal. So Jesus is speaking to a specific audience. Verse 10, he says, the two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. So you have the Pharisee, and I know we often point out the flaws of Pharisees, but make no mistake about it, a Pharisee was a highly respected religious leader of his day. There were 613 Old Testament laws, and even though it's kind of impressive that I remember that number, it's even more impressive that they followed and knew every single one of them and followed it to a T. So you have the Pharisee, the good guy, you have the tax collector. The tax collector, to give you an idea how they viewed a tax collector, would be like if your friend worked for both the IRS and Nazi Germany at the same time. That's the way that they would have looked at it, because he didn't just collect taxes for his government. He collected taxes for the Roman Empire. Yes, that same Roman Empire that had come in, conquered his own country, oppressed his own people. As a Jewish tax collector, your peers viewed you as the hands funding the expansion of the empire, and the other one around the throat of its people. But that's not all. The tax collector also made sure he collected a little something extra for himself, too. He was like the corrupt politician who lined his own pockets. He's like the drug dealer selling drugs in his own neighborhood to make a penny and become rich off his own friends. Some translations call him the despised tax collector. So here they are, the two men in the temple to talk to God, and this is what happens in verse 11. So the Pharisee stood up. And then look at what Scripture says. It says he was praying what? He was praying to himself. Or you could say it this way. The Pharisee stood up by himself. He distanced himself from everyone else who was there to do the same thing. And this is what he prays. He says, God, I thank you that I'm not like these other people. God, I thank you that I'm not like these other people. The swindlers, the unjust, the adulterers, or even this lowly tax collector. Because I fast twice a week and I pay tithes with all that I get. The Pharisee said this, God, I thank you that I do the right things and that I'm better than everybody else who's around me. And get this, the Pharisee wasn't completely wrong. He had some good things going in his life. By the age of 12, he would have memorized the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Not just the names of them, the whole thing. He spent time in God's Word. He tried to do what was right in his life. He had some good things going. But instead of seeing the good things in his life as a gift from God, he somehow began to see himself as the gift to God. Right? Instead of seeing all these things the good things as a gift from God, he started to view himself as the gift to God. And before we look down our noses at the Pharisees, we'd be wise to recognize the Pharisee that's inside of all of us. Instead of, God, thank you so much that I get to be a part of this church where I get to see you move every single week. It's, God, you're welcome that I showed up today. Instead of, God, thank you so much for the gift of these children to be able to raise and to be able to follow you. It's, God, you're welcome. I brought them all to church today. Because we stop seeing the good things in our life as a gift from God, and we begin to see ourselves as the gift to God. We begin to experience spiritual pride, and spiritual pride promises 3 things. Number 1, it promises us self-sufficiency, right? I've got this. My paper, I've got this. I've got what it takes. I don't need anybody else. I've got this. Psalm chapter 10, verse 4 shows us what this looks like. It says that in his pride, the wicked man does not seek the Lord. In all of his thoughts, there is no room for God. That's a spoonful of truth right there. As we are self-sufficient, we don't really need the Lord, do we? Because spiritual pride carries this blinding spirit of, I've got this, I know what I'm doing, I'm on my own, I'm not asking the church for help, I'll handle this, don't worry about it, I've got this. Spiritual pride also promises us, number 2, self-importance. I have value. I live in the right neighborhood. I carry the purse with the right name on it. My kids go to the right school. I've got an important job. I serve at my church. I have value. And because I'm self-sufficient, and because I have self-importance, I then have self-exaltation. As we deceive ourselves into to think that we are greater than we are. Our thoughts, our ideas are far superior to those that are around us. Ultimately, we believe I'm a better Christian than they are. I'm a better father than he is. I do far more there than anyone else at the church. I'm up here with the big man. Me and him, yep, just me and God up there. That's where you'll find me. And yet spiritual pride can hide for a little while as this inward emotion that not a lot of people can see. But then what happens? That pride, it doesn't like to stay hidden, does it? And it becomes this outward action. And we would never normally want to be associated with some of the things that we end up doing. It's actually a lot like what happened to me when I saved up and bought my first car. Nice. Here it is, 1978, booger green, Mazda something or other. And when I drove that car, my prayer life was awesome. I went, "Dear God, please don't let anyone recognize me while I'm driving to school today." Who had a car like this? You know, round. And we had to have a couple of those. Your parents called it a character builder. And this is how I drove until I had saved up enough money and I bought myself a 1993 Geo Storm with dual exhaust, a custom sunroof, 17-inch alloy wheels. It wasn't tan, it wasn't gold, it was teal. And you didn't have to see me coming, you could hear me coming because I had those JBL speakers cranked right up, a 3-disc Pioneer CD deck. If you're under 20, CDs are those little circle things that you Google it when you get home. But my tunes were a-rockin'. My windows were never rolled up. They were always rolled down. It didn't matter how cold it was. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't ashamed. In fact, I would drive through downtown honking my girl going, "Hey girl, how's it going?" What changed? What changed? Obviously, I was in a different car. But what changed was my inner emotion that led to my outer actions. And spiritual pride is exactly the same way. We experience the inner emotion like the Pharisee, and it leads to the outer action that we would never normally want to be associated with. Just like comparison. Comparison, would you look at what that lady is wearing? I wouldn't be caught dead in that outfit. You know, comparison, why do we compare? Because it's easier to have value and feel value in ourselves by lifting ourselves up and then by pushing other people down. Parents, we're probably the worst at this, right? It goes like, babe, I know we're not perfect parents, but like Mike and Jen's kids, they're crazy. They're going to end up in prison or something. They don't get those kids under control. Maybe for you it's not comparison. Maybe for you it's that thought that, you know what, I don't really need God in my life right now. I'm a good person. I know a lot of Christians, and quite frankly, I'm a whole lot better than those Christians are. So, I really don't need God in my life. Or maybe that's not for you. Maybe it's fault finding. You're an expert in finding everybody else's faults because it's easier to focus on their faults than to allow God to address the faults that are inside of you in your own lives. Maybe it's not fault-finding. Maybe it's attention-seeking. Hey, everybody, look at me. And we're more concerned with how many people like our Facebook page with our cup of coffee and our Bible verse all set up perfectly. And we spent more time trying to get all that together than allowing that verse to change our lives and to transform us to become more like Christ. I haven't been a pastor for very long, and I certainly don't know everything. But here's my guess. That most of us don't struggle with spiritual pride because we wake up in the morning, we think to ourselves that we're totally awesome. I mean, maybe a few of you might wake up like that and you just get out of bed and you just, man, I am killing it in every area of my life. I'm just awesome. And good for you if that's you. That's great. But I think most of us probably struggle with spiritual pride because we wake up in the morning, we know that we don't have it all together. And we're not that awesome. And so we spend so much time and energy and effort trying to convince everybody else, trying to convince God, and trying to convince ourselves that we're okay. And so maybe spiritual pride comes out in comparison, or maybe you struggle with that sneaky version. I'm going to call it just reverse spiritual pride. Reverse spiritual pride. Maybe you'll recognize one of these. Like it's impossible for you to receive a compliment with a simple thank you. Instead you sort of have to deflect it somehow with some sarcasm. It's better to be lucky than good. One of those. Or maybe it's the I could never. I could never be used by God. I'm really not that good at anything. God hasn't really given me a gift to bless me with to help other people. Or I could never share my faith with someone at work because I don't know enough about the Bible to share it with somebody. I could never. And the problem with reverse spiritual pride is the exact same thing as overt spiritual pride, because it all starts with what? It all starts with me. It all revolves around me and my values based on what I accomplish and how I compare to everybody else, just like the Pharisee. Let's look at 3 very real problems we run into when spiritual pride is a part of our life. The first truth is this. When we are full of ourselves, there is no room for God. Right? Psalms 10 just showed us this. When we are prideful, we become wicked people, the Bible says. Wicked. And that man no longer seeks the Lord in our lives, in our thoughts. There's just no room no longer for God. Look at the Pharisee's prayer again. He's praying, God, I thank you that I got it all together, that I'm not like those train wrecks over there. Is he seeking God? Thankfully, Jesus offers us a better way. We're going to pick the story back up in verse 13. We've already considered the Pharisee. Let's take a look at the tax collector. But the tax collector, standing some distance away, was unable to lift his eyes to heaven, beating on his chest. God, have mercy on me, the sinner. God, have mercy on me. Don't just give me justice. Don't give me what I deserve. Have mercy on me because I'm a sinner. Because he understands one thing, and it's if God doesn't intervene in his story, he is hopeless. Because there was a way to be made right underneath the law, and it was this, that he would have to pay back every single penny that he had ever collected plus 20%. Every single penny he had ever made plus 20%. Who could do that? God, have mercy on me, the sinner. And this is what Jesus says about the sinner's prayer. Verse 14. He says, I tell you, this man, not the respected Pharisee, the lowly tax collector, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself, everyone who lifts themselves up will be humbled, will be made low, but those who humble themselves will be exalted. Amen. You see, when we're full of ourselves, there's no room for God. But number 2, when we empty ourselves, when we humble ourselves, we are in the perfect position to be filled with God's grace. And here's why that's good news. Because some of you walked into church today and you've already been feeling sort of humbled. Maybe it's a life situation that humbled you. You're already saying what the tax collector is saying, which is, God, if you don't intervene in my life is hopeless. I'm a sinner. And the good news for you is that Jesus wants to intervene in your life. Jesus Christ wants to be the one that intercedes in your life. I'm the sinner. He wants to bring hope. He wants to bring mercy. He wants to bring forgiveness. And all we have to do is empty ourselves to be in the perfect position to be filled by God's grace. When I was going through this series a few months ago, I saw the last week was going to be on spiritual pride. And I think my heart skipped a beat or two, because I knew deep down inside that I had struggled with spiritual pride and specifically comparison. Being the pastor of this great church body has brought me just indescribable joy. But somehow I started comparing the number of people to the efforts of my works. In other words, a full house made me feel good about myself. Look at what I've accomplished. Look at how I compare to where we were 6 months ago. But the more empty seats there were, the less I would think of myself. And then the I'm not good enough. And maybe I'm not cut out for this lie started to manifest. When I first became the pastor, it was really easy to get wrapped up in all the excitement of everything. After all, we had this new church building. Easter, it was a full house. Christmas Eve, it was a full house. New things beginning to happen, and we were growing. People's lives were being changed. I heard what people said. Man, Nick, you're a really good leader. You know, Nick, I can really relate to you. Nick, this church is going to change so many people's lives. And I liked that. I liked hearing that. That made me feel good. But I started thinking, look at what I'm accomplishing. Then over the summer, I started to notice a problem. And the problem was the church had stopped growing. And there were people here one week and then gone the next. And I thought, I don't know how to fix this. This is kind of my job. I'm the one who's supposed to fix this. What am I doing wrong? And because my value is based on now what I have accomplished and how I compare and where this person go, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. And some of you are at church today, and you know that feeling of there's a problem, and I don't know how to fix this. And it's exhausting. Maybe it's your adult child and you're going, man, we did the best that we could with him. And compared to other parents, we did a pretty good job. But they're in a place now that we would never choose for them to be in. And I don't know how to fix this. Or you wake up this morning in a financial situation that you never intended for yourself to be in. And you don't know how to get yourself out of it. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe it's a relationship that you're in and you're saying, forget making it great. You know, I don't even know how to make this thing work. I don't know how to fix this. And if you've been in that situation, it's isolating, it's depressing, and it's maddening. And I remember one day, the beginning of August, I just finally had enough. And I said the things we think but don't dare to say up loud to God. And I was like, God, where are you? Like, I don't even understand why this is happening. This isn't what I signed up for. I make all these sacrifices. I'm putting all these little attentions to detail. I don't think anyone can even see what's going on. Well, what am I doing this for? Am I doing this for nothing? Is it even worth it? Doesn't even matter. God, why do I feel alone? God, why won't you help me? Show me what you want from me. God, are you even listening to me? And I can say that there have been a few times in my life where I felt God has almost spoken audibly to me. This was one of those times. And he said, Nick, how many? And I was like, what do you mean, how many? That's ridiculous. I don't even know what it is that you're asking. He said, how many people's lives would I have to change to make it worth it for you? To make it be worth what you signed up for? How many people's lives do I have to change for it to be enough? And I'm like, I don't know, God, that's ridiculous. I don't even know. And I can't just pick a number. He said, how about 1,000? How about 1,000? If I change 1,000 people's lives, would that be enough for you? And I said, man, 1,000 would be awesome, but God, I don't see anybody. He said, what about 100? I said, 100 would be awesome, God, but I don't see anybody. He said, what about 10? God, 10 would be awesome, but I don't see anybody. What about one? If I change one person's life, would that be enough for you? Yeah, God, one person would be enough, but I don't see anybody. And then God asked, what if that one is you? Is me changing your life enough for you? He got me. Because what he said to me was this: you can posture yourself as a Pharisee all that you want. Saying, look at what I've accomplished, look at what I've done. But you're not going to find what you're looking for, because what you're looking for is this unattainable goal. You're just building yourself a prison for yourself to live in. Or you can choose the better way, which is the way of the tax collector, who said, God, you've done more than I deserve. You've done more than I can earn, because without you, my situation is hopeless. And what God did in that season of my life, I never want to experience that again, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. And that story is emotional to me, not because of the difficulty, but because the goodness of God. That he loved me enough to essentially look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Which is, Nick, there's a better way to live. Through humility. Through humility. And this is our third truth. Because when you empty yourself, not only are you in the best position to receive God's grace, you're also in the perfect position to be used by God. When we fully empty ourselves, we are in the perfect position to be used by God. I've had some people ask me, hey, Nick, do you ever get nervous when you preach? If it's 100 people, if it's 1,000 people, do you ever get nervous? And honestly, my answer is absolutely not. Absolutely not, because when I step up here to preach, I know that God has called me, that he has equipped me, and that he'll be glorified through me. Absolutely not, because when you humble yourself before God, when you empty yourself, you're not operating out of a position of weakness. Humility is a position of strength. It's a position of strength, but not my strength, not my sufficiency, not my importance, not that my name will be lifted up. It's a position of strength because Jesus died on that cross for me, the lowly sinner. Jesus says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. He says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. He says, my power is made perfect in your weakness. Paul adds this in verse 10. He says, this is why for Christ's sake, I delight in my weaknesses, in all the insults, the hardships, the persecutions, all the difficulties. For when I am weak, I am strong. I am strong. Jesus would undo spiritual pride, because pride is about my glory. Pride is about making my name great. But humility, humility is about God's glory, making God's name great. I think we have an important question to answer. And there's actually a question to answer the question that I want to share with you. The question is, so how do we empty ourselves before God to bring humility into our lives? And so to answer that, this is the question I want you to ask yourself. So when you're experiencing those inward emotions that lead to those outward actions, when you have that fear inside of you, when you're experiencing the anxiety, when you're facing a decision, you ask yourself one question. Is this about my glory? Is this about lifting my name up? Or is this about God's glory and lifting his name up? Because pride promises you freedom through being enough, but delivers a prison of unattainable goal. While humility offers us the freedom that you can experience that you can't experience outside of Jesus Christ? Is this about my glory or is this about God's glory? And please hear me, I'm not speaking as one that's got it all together, that doesn't deal with this. The best description that I've heard fighting pride in your life is like it's like peeling an onion. With God's help, he's going to peel a layer back. And then down the road, you're going to realize that there's another layer, and he's dealt with comparison in my life, and he's going to peel that back. Now he has to deal with the I could nevers. And then he's going to start peeling that layer back, and he's going to peel another layer back. And the more he peels those back, the more we become like Christ. The more he continues to peel the onion, we become more like, no longer are you entangled in the lies, but instead you're going to empty yourself, receiving his grace and being in the perfect position to be used by him. Our last verse for today is Matthew chapter 5, 16. Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. These are Jesus' words to us. He says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify who? And glorify your Father who is in heaven. God has called you. He's equipped you. He's going to use you to bring glory to his name. The problem with pride is that when we fill ourselves up, there's no room for God. But that's not going to be us. Because we're gonna empty ourselves like the tax collector. We're going to empty ourselves, putting ourselves in the perfect position to be filled by God's grace. And we're going to empty ourselves and we're going to humble ourselves because the perfect position is to be used by God. If you need prayers today or you need Jesus Christ to come into your life and to peel back more layers of that pride that you've been dealing with, please come forward as we stand and sing.